When was the moment you realized your parents didn't see you as a person, just something they owned? It's a chilling thought, but when did you realize your own parents saw you as nothing more than a commodity, a piece of property to be sold? For me, that gut-wrenching moment hit like a punch to the stomach the day I turned 21, when my father locked me in our basement, all because I dared to refuse a forced marriage to his 48-year-old business partner. I remember it with terrifying clarity. I'd just wrapped up my third year of university, buzzing to be home for summer break. My father had been acting off. He kept going on and on about this amazing opportunity, how our family was finally going to shoot up in the world. I pictured some big business deal, a new venture. Turns out, I was the venture. Raphael, this man I'd met a few times at my father's corporate events, showed up for dinner that night. He always gave me serious creepy vibes. The way his eyes would linger when he thought no one was looking, like he owned whatever he gazed at. I never understood why my father pushed me to attend those events until that evening. We were halfway through dinner, the clinking of silverware the only sound, when my father started. He launched into this monologue about how Raphael had always admired me, how he'd be such a good provider, how lucky I was that such a successful man was interested in someone like me. My stomach churned. Raphael just sat there, a sickening smile plastered on his face, like this was all completely normal. Then my father pulled out a small box, presenting it like a prize. He announced that Raphael had asked for my hand, and he, my father, had given his blessing. I honestly thought it was a twisted joke. I looked at my mother, she just stared at her plate, her face a mask. My brother, Hayden, wouldn't meet my eyes. I actually laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound, and told them all to get lost. That's when my father's face shifted. I'd seen him angry before, but never like this. His voice dropped, deadly quiet. He told me I didn't have a choice. That Raphael was offering $2 million to merge our family businesses through this marriage. $2 million. I wasn't a person. I was a price tag. I shot out of my chair. I'm not for sale. I tried to storm out of the room, but Raphael moved fast, grabbing my arm. He said he'd been patient long enough, that my father had promised him. Panic flared. I snatched the closest thing, a wine glass, and without thinking, I smashed it against his face. Everything exploded after that. My father absolutely lost it. He started screaming about how I'd ruined everything, how I was nothing but an ungrateful brat who didn't understand his sacrifices. Raphael was bleeding, muttering something about taming me. My mother had retreated into the corner, just crying. I tried to run, but my father caught me. He dragged me, kicking and fighting, down the stairs to our basement. It was finished, had a bathroom, no windows. Used to be our rec room, but he'd converted it for his collectibles. He shoved me inside, snarling that I could come out when I was ready to apologize and accept my responsibility to this family. I heard the lock click. My blood ran cold. I screamed until my throat was raw, my knuckles aching as I pounded on the door. No one came. My phone was upstairs. No way to call for help. This can't be real, I kept thinking. They can't just keep me here. Someone will realize this is insane. But no one did. I could hear them moving around upstairs. The next morning, I heard Raphael's voice, still there, talking business with my father, like the daughter of the house wasn't trapped, screaming for help, just feet below them. That evening, my mother slipped some food under the door. I begged her, pleaded with her to let me out. She just whispered that I needed to cooperate, that my father had invested everything in this deal, that our family would be ruined if I didn't agree. When I choked out, "How can you let this happen to your own daughter?" she looked away. Sometimes, she said, her voice barely a whisper, women have to make sacrifices for the family. Then she left. By the second day, a cold panic had settled deep in my bones. Raphael's voice, my father's business talk, they were finalizing details. They were planning my future as if I'd already agreed. I wasn't going to be let out until I gave in. My father came down that night. He slid some papers under the door, a marriage contract. He told me to read it over. Said I'd be signing it tomorrow, whether I wanted to or not. Raphael, he added, was being generous, considering my behavior. That's when he said it, the words that would haunt me. You're worth $2 million to this family, and you will not ruin this deal. I sat in that dark basement, staring into the blackness, realizing I'd never been a daughter to him. Just an asset. Something to trade. Property. It was Hayden who finally freed me, after 48 agonizing hours. He looked absolutely terrified. He whispered that he couldn't take it anymore, hearing me cry like that. Our father and Raphael had gone to the bank, he said, to set up the accounts for the business merger. He told me to run, that he'd give me a head start before telling them. But when I got upstairs, I saw the papers on the dining table. The marriage contract. Already signed. My father had forged my signature. That's when something inside me just broke. I knew screaming and fighting wouldn't work. They'd just lock me up again, maybe somewhere worse. So, when they came back, I faked it. Pretended to be defeated. I apologized to Raphael, said I'd been overwhelmed, that I understood now. The relief on my father's face was sickening. Raphael looked smug, like he'd won his prize. My mother hugged me, whispering, "Thank you," in my ear, as if I'd done her a favor. Only Hayden looked sick about the whole thing. The wedding was set for 3 months later. Enough time. Enough time to plan. Those 3 months were the longest, most suffocating of my life. Every morning, I'd wake up feeling like I couldn't breathe, trapped in a house with people who saw me as something to be sold. Raphael started coming over almost daily, always with gifts, expensive jewelry, but they had this possessive edge to them. Necklaces that felt like collars. Bracelets that were just a little too tight. He'd watch me with those eyes, always watching, while I forced myself to pretend gratitude. My skin crawled every time he touched me, a hand on my lower back, lingering just a bit too long. He'd talk about our future home, this mansion he owned outside the city where I'd be comfortable while he worked. Comfortable like a pet in a very expensive cage. My father, oblivious, treated the whole thing like a successfully closed business transaction. He started talking about me in the third person when Raphael was around. She's always been good with numbers, or she knows how to entertain guests properly, selling my features like I was some kind of product. One night, I overheard him telling Raphael that I'd settle down once the wedding was done and that he shouldn't worry about my temporary attitude problem. My mother tried to play both sides. She'd slip into my room at night with these sad, haunted eyes, telling me she understood how hard this was. Then, in the very next breath, she'd be showing me wedding magazines, droning on about how Raphael could provide such a good life for me. When I finally asked her how she could do this, she just said marriage was about building a future, not silly things like love or attraction. She'd learned to appreciate my father over time, she insisted. That's when the horrifying realization dawned, she'd gone through something similar. Maybe not as extreme, but she'd been traded, too. Hayden was the only one who seemed to see how utterly messed up it all was. He'd shoot me these horrified looks during dinner when Raphael would say something particularly disgusting about training me to run his household. We started having whispered conversations late at night, when no one else was around. He was only 19, still financially dependent, scared of our father, but he desperately wanted to help. I knew I had to escape before the wedding. But it wasn't as simple as just running away. My father had frozen my bank accounts, claiming it was protecting my future interests. He'd taken my passport and ID for safekeeping while we prepared the marriage license paperwork. Raphael had hired a wedding planner who was clearly watching me, reporting back on my every move. I wasn't even allowed to go anywhere alone anymore. It was always my mother or the planner, shadowing me like guards. I started small. I told Raphael I wanted to prove I could be a good wife. I asked to help with some of his business paperwork. He loved that. Thought I was finally accepting my role. I used it to get access to his contact information, learned his routines, figured out when he'd be unreachable. I even started pretending I was getting excited about the wedding, deliberately bringing up details just to get my father to leave the room to take business calls. Those brief moments gave me chances to search his office. That's how I found out my father was in serious financial trouble. His company was failing. Had been for years. Raphael's merger wasn't just adding money, it was saving my father from complete bankruptcy. That's why he was so desperate. That's why he was willing to sell his daughter. $2 million wasn't profit, it was survival. The worst part was the wedding dress shopping. Standing there in these pristine white gowns while my mother and the wedding planner cried about how beautiful I looked. All I could think was how I was being dressed up for my own funeral. Raphael insisted on seeing photos of each dress, texting back his opinions like he had every right. The neckline should be lower. I want to see more skin. And my mother would just nod and ask for alterations. Every night, I'd lock my bedroom door, push furniture against it, and cry silently into my pillow, the tears burning tracks down my face. The wedding invitations went out. People started calling to congratulate me. Old friends from high school messaged about how lucky I was to marry such a wealthy man. Nobody questioned the age gap. Nobody asked if I was okay with it. They just saw the money. Hayden was the one who helped me get my ID back. He created this huge, screaming fight with my father, a perfect distraction, while I snuck into his office and broke into his safe. Didn't get my passport, but at least I had my driver's license. I started slowly collecting cash. Small amounts my mother wouldn't notice missing from her purse. Selling jewelry Raphael had given me to pawn shops 2 towns over when I was supposedly at dress fittings. Things got even worse when Raphael decided he needed to prepare me for married life. He started having these private dinners, grilling me on his preferences, telling me exactly how he liked his house run, what he expected from a wife. He declared I wouldn't be returning to university once we were married. Educated women, he'd sneer, make poor mothers. He expected children within the first year. He'd sit too close. Touch my thigh under the table. He ignored my flinches, my recoiling. One night, he tried to kiss me. Pushed me against the wall when I turned my face away. You need to get used to it, he hissed, his breath hot on my ear. We'll be doing much more than kissing after the wedding. I had to force myself not to fight back, to just freeze, to tolerate it. I couldn't risk him telling my father I was still resistant. I just stood there, his disgusting wet mouth on my neck, his hands gripping my waist too hard, feeling utterly violated. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out they'd already decided where I would live, what I would wear, even what I would be allowed to eat. I overheard Raphael talking to my father about how he didn't want me getting fat after the wedding, how he'd have his housekeeper monitor my meals. They talked about me like I was a show dog that needed to maintain its appearance. That was it. That was when Hayden finally snapped. We were sitting in his room, me telling him what I'd overheard, and he just stood up, his voice cracking with fury. Forget this. We're getting you out. He said he had some college money saved, not much, but enough to get away. Enough to hide somewhere Raphael and my father couldn't find me. We made the plan in whispers late at night. Hayden would create a massive distraction the day before the wedding, something so big no one would immediately notice I was gone. I'd take a bus to the city, then another bus across state lines. I had a friend from university who'd let me stay with her without asking questions. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. What we didn't count on was my mother finding the bus ticket. She was cleaning my room, something she never did, and found it tucked inside a book. I came back from another horrible lunch with Raphael to find her sitting on my bed, ticket in hand, her face white with shock. I thought she'd run straight to my father. Instead, she just looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, and asked, "Do you hate him that much?" "Not my father. Raphael." As if that was the only reason I wouldn't want to marry a man old enough to be my father who saw me as property to be controlled. I couldn't lie anymore. I told her yes. I hated him. Hated the way he looked at me, touched me, talked about me. Hated that my father had sold me. Hated that she had let it happen. I started crying then, all the fear and disgust and rage finally pouring out. I told her I couldn't breathe when he was near me, couldn't sleep knowing what was coming after the wedding. For one brief moment, I thought she understood. She hugged me, stroked my hair like she used to when I was little, whispered that she was sorry, then added, "But you'll learn to live with it." That broke something in me. I realized she wasn't going to help. That in her mind, this was just how the world worked. Women were traded, used, controlled. They adapted. They survived by giving in. She didn't tell my father about the ticket. But she started watching me constantly. She wouldn't leave me alone with Hayden. She told the wedding planner to check my bags whenever we went out. My one potential escape route was gone. The night before the wedding rehearsal dinner, Raphael came over with more contracts, business agreements between him and my father. I heard them talking in the study. Raphael saying he wanted everything finalized before the ceremony. My father agreeing, sounding relieved, grateful even. I stood outside that door, listening to them discuss the terms of my sale. Raphael declared he'd transfer the first $1 million upon signing the marriage certificate. The second would come after I had proven myself a good wife for 6 months. They had metrics for this. Actual written criteria for how I would be evaluated: obedience, availability, appearance, fertility. I went back to my room and threw up. I sat on the bathroom floor, shaking, realizing I was out of time, out of options. In less than 48 hours, I would be legally bound to this man. I would be taken to his house where no one would hear me scream, where I would be completely trapped. That night, I made a new plan. A desperate one. If I couldn't escape, I'd have to make Raphael back out. Make him decide I wasn't worth the investment after all. The rehearsal dinner was at this ridiculously expensive restaurant Raphael had rented out completely. All his business associates were there, people from my father's company, extended family who looked at me with either envy or pity. I sat next to Raphael at the main table, his hand a cold weight on my knee under the tablecloth, squeezing whenever I shifted away. I waited. Until everyone was there. Until all eyes were on us. Raphael stood to make a toast, droning on about how excited he was to welcome me into his life, how grateful he was to my father for entrusting him with his greatest treasure. That's when I stood up. I looked around at all those faces, the stunned silence, and said in the clearest, calmest voice I'd ever managed, "I need everyone to know that I'm being forced into this marriage. That my father locked me in our basement for 2 days when I refused Raphael's proposal. That he forged my signature on the marriage contract. That Raphael is paying him $2 million to marry me against my will." The room went absolutely silent. Raphael's face twisted into something terrifying. My father half rose from his chair, his face purple with rage, but I kept going. I told them everything. How Raphael talked about training me, the criteria for being a good wife, how they'd taken my documents, controlled my movements, planned out every aspect of my future without my consent. I finished by looking directly at Raphael's business partners, my voice ringing with steel. Is this really the kind of man you want to be associated with? Someone who has to buy a wife. Who locks up women who say no to him? My father was across the room in seconds, grabbing my arm so hard it bruised instantly, hissing that I needed to shut my mouth. Raphael was trying to laugh it off, telling everyone I was emotional about the wedding, had cold feet, but I could see it in people's faces. The shock. The discomfort. Some of the women looked physically ill. One of Raphael's older colleagues was staring at him with undisguised disgust. My father dragged me out of the restaurant. Practically threw me into the car. The entire ride home, he didn't speak. Just this terrible, heavy silence that terrified me more than his yelling ever had. My mother was crying in the passenger seat. Hayden looked both proud and scared out of his mind. When we got home, my father grabbed me by the hair, dragging me toward the basement door, screaming that I'd ruined everything, that I'd destroyed our family, that I was nothing but an ungrateful brat who'd rather destroy her family than do her duty. Hayden tried to stop him, actually tackled him to the ground. They fought while I scrambled away, ran to my room, and locked the door. I could hear them still fighting, furniture breaking, my mother screaming for them to stop. I sat with my back against the door, heart pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I didn't know what would happen now. Didn't know if my plan had worked or if I had just made everything infinitely worse. All I knew was that I couldn't take back what I'd done. Couldn't unsay those words. My phone started blowing up. Texts from Raphael, each one more threatening than the last. Calling me a lying bitch, saying I would regret humiliating him, that no one made a fool of him and got away with it. He vowed he would make sure I had nothing and no one when he was done with me. Then my father started pounding on my door. I could hear the wood splintering as he threw his weight against it, screaming that he would kill me himself before he let me ruin everything he'd worked for. I spent that night barricaded in my room, listening to my father rage through the house. He'd stopped trying to break down my door after Hayden called the police, but I could hear him downstairs smashing things, screaming about ungrateful children and family loyalty. My phone kept buzzing with texts from Raphael, threats mixed with bizarre attempts to salvage the situation. One minute he was saying he'd destroy me, the next offering to forgive me if I apologized publicly, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. The police came, talked to everyone. My father somehow pulled himself together, told them it was just a family disagreement about wedding stress. They didn't even ask to speak to me separately, just accepted his explanation and left. Classic useless cops. They saw a nice house in a good neighborhood and assumed nothing truly bad could happen here. Hayden slept on the floor outside my door that night. Said he wasn't going to let anyone get to me. I could hear my mother crying in her bedroom, my father's voice rising and falling as he alternated between threatening her and pleading with her to fix this mess. Morning came, and the house was eerily quiet. I was afraid to come out, but eventually hunger and the need for a bathroom that wasn't attached to my bedroom forced me to unlock the door. I found Hayden still there, bleary-eyed but determined. He walked with me downstairs, keeping himself between me and any potential threat. The house looked like a hurricane had hit it. Broken glass everywhere. Pictures knocked off walls, furniture overturned. But no sign of my parents. Hayden said they'd left early, heard the car pull out around 5 a.m. Neither of us knew where they'd gone, but I had a sickening feeling it involved Raphael. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I needed to know what was happening. I called my mother. No answer. My father's phone went straight to voicemail. Finally, I texted a cousin who was supposed to be in the wedding party. She responded immediately. The wedding was still on. My parents were telling everyone I'd had a nervous breakdown, but would be better in time for the ceremony. They were lying to everyone, spinning a story where I was mentally unstable rather than being sold like property. I felt like I was going to pass out. Hayden made me sit down, brought me water, kept saying we'd figure this out, but I could see the fear in his eyes, too. We were just kids, really. Me at 21, him at 19. What could we possibly do against the full force of our father's determination? That's when Raphael called. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I needed to know what he was planning. He told me he'd spoken with my father, that they'd come to an understanding about my outburst. He said he was still willing to go through with the wedding, because he understood that women sometimes get emotional. Then his voice changed, got harder. He said if I didn't show up tomorrow, properly apologetic and ready to be a good wife, he would make sure my father lost everything. He would make sure Hayden lost his college fund, his future. He said he had enough influence to destroy our entire family. I spent the next hours in a panic, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't run. I had nowhere to go. No money. And now Raphael would be watching for that. I couldn't stay. My father would literally drag me to that altar if he had to. I felt completely trapped. Hayden and I were still trying to come up with a plan when our parents came home. My father looked different. Not raging anymore, but something colder, more calculated. My mother wouldn't look at me at all. They sat us down in what was left of the living room, and my father explained the new arrangement. The wedding would proceed as planned. Raphael had generously agreed to overlook my emotional outburst, on the condition that I make a public statement claiming I'd been under stress and hadn't meant what I said. I would apologize to his business associates. I would be a model wife. In exchange, Raphael would still pay the $2 million, and our family business would be saved. If I refused, Raphael would not only withdraw his offer but would use his connections to ensure my father's business failed completely. He would make sure no bank would ever loan to us again. He would ruin Hayden's chances at any decent job in the future. My father delivered this like he was reading a business proposal, not describing the sale of his daughter's life. I looked at my mother, begging her with my eyes to help me. She just stared at the floor and whispered that sometimes sacrifices had to be made for family, that I needed to be strong, that I would adjust eventually. That's when I truly understood. There was no escape. No help coming. No one who would stand up for me except Hayden, who was as trapped as I was. Something cracked inside me. Not breaking, but hardening. I realized that if I was going to survive this, I needed to stop hoping for rescue and start thinking differently. I told my father I needed time to think. He looked suspicious, but said I had until morning to come to my senses. He warned me not to try running again. Said Raphael had hired people to watch the house to make sure his investment was secure. Back in my room, I sat on my bed, staring at the wall for hours, thinking about the life ahead of me, being owned by Raphael, bearing his children, slowly dying inside while everyone pretended it was normal. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. But I couldn't see a way out that didn't destroy everyone else I cared about, too. Hayden came in around midnight, sat beside me. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he asked if I remembered when we were kids, and we'd make escape plans for zombie apocalypses or alien invasions. How we always promised we'd stick together no matter what. I started crying then. He said he couldn't watch this happen to me. That he'd rather give up his future than see me sacrificed. That's when the idea came. I told Hayden we needed to find leverage. Something that would make Raphael back off without destroying our family in the process. If this was a business deal to them, we needed to make it a bad investment. We spent the night digging through everything we could find. My father's business files, old emails, financial records Hayden could access through the family computer, looking for anything we could use. We found plenty of evidence of my father's financial troubles, but nothing that would help against Raphael. Morning came too quickly. I could hear my parents moving around downstairs, my mother calling up that it was time to start getting ready. The wedding planner would be arriving soon to help me dress, do my hair, make sure I looked perfect for my sale. That's when Hayden found it. An old email thread buried deep in my father's archives. Conversations between him and Raphael going back 3 years. Planning this. Planning my marriage since I was 18. Discussing how to prepare me for the idea. Raphael talking about how he'd had his eye on me since I was 16, attending my father's company picnic. My father responding with suggestions on how to maximize the arrangement. Never once discussing what I might want. Just calculating the best time to cash in on their investment. I felt physically sick reading it. Raphael had been watching me, waiting, since I was a minor. He had been planning this with my father while I was still legally a child. I took screenshots of everything. Sent them to my email, to Hayden's email, to a new account I created just for backup. Then I went downstairs. I found my parents and told them I needed to speak to Raphael before the ceremony. Needed to apologize properly, in private. My father looked relieved. He thought I'd given in. He called Raphael immediately to arrange it. Raphael arrived looking smug, like he'd won. My father left us alone in the study, a final courtesy before delivering me to my new owner. As soon as the door closed, Raphael's facade dropped. He told me he was going to make me pay for every second of embarrassment I'd caused him. That once we were married, I'd learn exactly what happened to disobedient wives. I just looked at him calmly and showed him the emails. I watched his face change as he realized what I had. I told him if he didn't walk away from this wedding, from our family completely, these would go to every business associate he had, to the press, to anyone who might be interested in knowing he'd been planning to acquire a teenage girl through her father. It might not be technically illegal since nothing happened while I was underage, I told him, but it would destroy his reputation. No one would do business with him again. He tried to grab my phone. I stepped back, told him it was already backed up in multiple places. That Hayden had copies, too, with instructions on what to do if anything happened to me. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I demanded he call off the wedding, return any contracts my father had signed, walk away completely. He tried to argue, to threaten, but I just kept my finger hovering over the send button on an email addressed to his entire contact list. Finally, he broke. Agreed to everything. I watched him leave. I still couldn't believe it had worked. My father came in moments later, his face ashen. Raphael had told him everything was off. No merger, no money, no wedding. He lost it. Started screaming at me, saying I'd destroyed our family, asking what I'd done, what I'd said to make Raphael back out. I just looked at him. This man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped with my homework, and then tried to sell me like livestock. I felt nothing but pity. I told him I knew about the emails. Knew he'd been planning this for years. I saw the shock on his face, then the cold calculation as he tried to figure out how to spin this, how to justify it. I cut him off before he could start. I told him he had a choice to make. He could let me go, back to university, to my own life, where I could send those emails to everyone, could destroy his reputation the way he'd nearly destroyed my life. My mother was crying in the doorway, Hayden standing silently behind her. My father looked at them, then back at me. He asked why I was doing this to him, like I was the one hurting him, like he was the victim here. That's when my mother finally found her voice. She told him enough was enough. That she'd stood by while he gambled away their future, while he made bad business decisions, while he tried to solve his problems by selling their daughter. But she wouldn't watch him blame me for his failures. The next few hours were a blur. Calls canceling the wedding, guests being told there was a family emergency, Raphael's things being removed from our house. My father locked himself in his study, wouldn't speak to any of us. My mother moved silently through the house, looking both relieved and terrified about what would happen next. That night, I packed my things. I couldn't stay there anymore. Hayden helped me load my car, made me promise to call when I reached my friend's place, hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. My mother stood in the driveway watching, tears streaming down her face. She said she was sorry, that she should have protected me, that she'd been weak. I couldn't forgive her yet, but I told her, maybe someday. My father never came out to say goodbye. I could see him watching from his study window as I drove away. I don't know if he was angry, ashamed, or just calculating his next move. I didn't care anymore. It's been 6 months since then. I'm back at university, finishing my degree. My father's company eventually failed. Turns out Raphael made sure of that. His final, spiteful act of revenge. My parents had to sell the house, move to something smaller. My mother calls sometimes, trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. My father never does. Hayden moved in with me. Transferred to a college nearby. Says he couldn't stay in that house after everything that happened. I still have the screenshots, just in case Raphael ever decides to try again. But mostly, I try to focus on building a life that belongs only to me. A life I fought for.